Well, welcome everybody. I see some familiar faces in the audience. A special welcome to them and to new friends. I'm Dr. Sally Blair, Senior Director of Fellowship Programs here at the National Endowment for Democracy. On behalf of NED's International Forum for Democratic Studies, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's presentation, Burma 2015, the Make or Break Moment for Democratization, featuring Reagan-Fussell Democracy Fellow Zin Mar Aung. We are also delighted to have with us as a discussant John Knaus, Senior Program Officer for Southeast Asia and North Korea at NED. Funded by the U.S. Congress, the Reagan-Fussell Democracy Fellows Program hosts some of the world's most dedicated democracy activists, scholars, and journalists to conduct independent research and pursue projects here at NED. Now in our 13th year, the program has hosted more than 200 fellows from over 80 countries since its founding in 2001. Within this remarkable group, our speaker today stands out for her personal courage and leadership in advocating for human rights and democracy in Burma. Liberalization by the Burmese military regime has been much lauded on the international stage. However, the military apparatus continues to wield overwhelming influence over the legislative, executive, judiciary, and economic state sectors. Instead of keeping up the momentum of liberalization, the state has allowed religiously based ultra-nationalist movements to gain power and infringe on human rights, especially women's rights. Distortion of nationalist ideas and manipulation of religious chauvinism have become serious challenges confronting further democratization in Burma. In this situation, Democrats, civil society organizations, and women's rights advocates face serious hurdles in the shrinking space allowed to them. In her presentation today, Zin Mar Aung will chart the course of change in recent years, evaluating current challenges and opportunities for Burmese civil society to counter military influence and the rising tide of Buddhist ultranationalism. Zin Mar Aung is co-founder of Rainfall, a Yangon-based organization that empowers women in Burma through human rights trainings and awareness building at the community level. A former prisoner of conscience, she was arrested in 1998 for participating in the student-led democratic uprisings against Burma's military regime and released 11 years later. In 2009, she formed a self-help group for ex-political prisoners and co-founded the Cultural Impact Studies Club to promote the idea that democracy is compatible with Asian culture. In 2011, she co-founded the Yangon School of Political Science, a NED-funded institution that educates young activists in the values of democracy. For her efforts to strengthen women's rights, democratic values, and conflict resolution in Burma, she was awarded the International Women of Courage Award in 2012 by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. John Knaus, Senior Program Officer for Asia, has worked at the National Endowment for Democracy's Asia programs, primarily in mainland Southeast Asia and North Korea since 1997. John travels throughout Asia to assist and evaluate current NED grantees, consult with experts, and develop future programs. Prior to joining the endowment, he worked with Tibetan refugees in northern India. He earned his BA in political science from Stanford University and his MA with distinction in international relations from Johns Hopkins School, SAIS. His writings on Asia have appeared in the Korea Times, The Nation, Bangkok, the Huffington Post, and the Journal of Democracy. We will now turn the floor over to Zin Mar, who will speak for approximately 25 minutes, followed by John for approximately 10. For those of you on Twitter, you can follow this presentation, contribute to the conversation by using the hashtag NEDEvents or by following the forum @ThinkDemocracy and the endowment @NEDemocracy. If you have not already done so, please join me in taking a moment to silence your cell phones And finally, let me take this opportunity to thank the many staff members involved with this event, and most especially Research Associate Elise Alexander, who has offered vital assistance and will continue to do so throughout our presentation today to the Fellowship Project and today's presentation. Thank you.
Does it work? Hello. Okay. Thank you so much, Sally, for your kind introductions, and thank you so much, John, for being with us. Thank you so much, Melissa, St. Alice, for all of your assistance to make it happen, of course, and also want to thank to all of the rest of NET team. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks, especially to Burmese community here in DC, and all of you for being here. As you know, 2015 is a critical year for Burma, since after the transition has started. In order to understand actually the mood of Burmese transitions and current situations, I think we need to have a look back a bit before the dramatic changes started. In my point of view, the background scheme of today's transition was actually set up in 2003. The regime launched a 7-step roadmap by reconvening the National Convention to draft the Constitution. During the period between 2003 and 2008, the military government put every effort towards completing the Constitution, which controversially contained provision giving the military veto power in the legislature, barring any possibility of carrying out transitional justice against the past military government's serious human rights violation. After international pressure over the brutal repressions of peaceful protests led by the Buddhist monks in September 2007, which is known as Saffron Revolution, the regime announced a national referendum for a new constitution to be held in May 2008. Actually, it was just a week before the referendum that outbreak of Cyclone Nuggets killed 84,500 people. 53,800 were went missing, and 2.4 million people were affected because of Cyclone Nuggets. Regardless of that, the regime declined to postpone the referendum and approved the 2008 Constitution. State-owned media mentioned that the Constitution was approved by the 92.4% approval out of 99% voter turnout. Imagine. As part of accomplishments of every step of roadmap, the regime announced amnesty for many prisoners. In 2009, I was released as part of this trend. So according to the new constitutions, the regime held the elections in 2010, and the regime proceeds as they planned. At the time, there are still more than 2,000 political prisoners in jail, including the prominent opposition leaders, Aung San Suu Kyi, and 88 Generation Students Group led by Min Aung Hlaing. So at the time, the strongest opposition party, NLD, National League for Democracy Party, boycotts the elections. So anywhere, people hope that there will be some forms of changes after the election. There was a kind of civil line after President Thein Sein's quasi-civilian government took power. These hopeful developments include continuations of the release of political prisoners and easings of media censorship. In that point, self-censorships and media ownerships are another factor we need to consider. Another significant development was the president's statement on the suspension of Nyissol Dam hydropower projects in response to huge demand to stop it by the local Kachin people and people across the country because of the negative effect on the local people. The project would have been devastating culturally, environmentally, without benefiting the local people economically, socially, and so on. After the release of the opposition leaders, there was a meeting between President Thein Sein and the opposition leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. So dramatic changes were happening at the same time, such as re-registration of the opposition party, National League for Democracy, to compete in 2012 by-elections, in which NLD won 42 seats out of 44 open seats. At that time, nobody knows whether Burmese political honeymoon will ever end, and the tide of hope was high. These changes were overwhelmingly welcomed by the international community. The positive response, including re-engagements of the international community, politically and economically. You see, politically, there was an exchange visit of high-level officials and world-class leaders. New diplomatic relations have been started, such as upgrading the diplomatic relations with the United States, and opening new embassy by the countries like Canada. Just a few months ago, Canada opened new embassy in Rangoon. Financially, there was a visible effort to upgrade financial institutions, even though there are very little effect on daily life of our ordinary citizen. World-class expertise pour in, and financial institutions such as IMF and World Bank are offering to help the economic development. Foreign direct investment has been increased dramatically. During the last fiscal year, 2014, last year, foreign direct investment reached 4.11 billion. 4.11 billion, according to the government-run Myanmar Investment Commission. Just compare to the amount of 2009 and 2010 fiscal years, there was only 329.6 million. 329.6 million in 2009 and 2010. So during the stages of liberalization, the quasi-civilian government gained legitimacy, both domestically and internationally, that they had never gotten in the past 25 years. Since the success of the opposition party in the 2012 by-elections, there were some forms of backsliding, such as communal violence and resolved land confiscations and successful peace talk, and arresting the journalists and human rights activists. Out of that, I would like to address the issue of communal violence, which gradually revealed the real attitude of the transition. In May 2012, the conflict was inflamed by a rape case committed by Muslim men against a Buddhist Rakhine woman. Instead of being addressed as a rape case, the incident devolved into racial and religious issue because of the state failure to take effective legal action. The rape case was followed by the retaliatory killing of Muslims and increased tensions between the two communities. Again, followed by the cyclical patterns of violence spreading to other parts of the country. Based on that, the grassroots-based 969 anti-Muslim movement took this advantage of space to gain broad ground, especially in rural areas, under the flag of nationalism. Gradually, 969 movement evolved into the formally organized associations called Malbadar. I would like to explain in English language, which means Association for Protections of Race and Religion. Next. In June 2013, the Malbadar called an assembly and started to write the laws to protect race and religion. The set of law includes religious conversions, interfaith marriage, population control, and monogamy. The drafted laws especially targeted marriage between the Buddhist women and non-Buddhist men and give the state control over the individual's life. Later, government officials publicly praised Malbadar as a hero organization of the nation for protecting race and religion, even though the leader of Malbadar publicly delivered dangerous hate speech across the country. At last, Malbadar came fully into the political arena. The protections of race and religious law has been submitted to the parliament through President Thein Sein, who was applauded as a reformer. The law will be up for debate during the next parliamentary sessions in January this month. Within a few days, it's coming. At the same time, one of the leading monks of Malbadar threatened, if any of parliamentary members vote against this law, they will lose votes in the upcoming 2015 elections. Along with this issue, human rights situation is deteriorating. Numbers of political prisoners have increased. Recently, according to the AAPP, Association for the System for Political Prisoners, around 80 political prisoners, including journalists. 175 are on trial. Most of them are related to the land rights activities and peaceful demonstrations. One freelance journalist a few months ago was killed by the military while documenting such issues. And last month, one local woman land rights activist was killed by the police in a coal mining project. Human rights activities and human rights activists, including myself, who publicly criticized the anti-interfaith marriage law, received death threats like that. An abusive phone call also. Even though we informed the police of our situations, there are no protection at all. In the past, there were only state-sponsored human rights violations. That was we much focusing on. Now, the state allows through neglect additional human rights violations between people. In this situation, while the state neglects its responsibility to address these human rights violations, civil society and human rights activist groups respond in many ways within their own extent, especially women rights groups which initiated a campaign to address the issue of anti-interfaith marriage law, which directly violate women's human rights. Women's groups believe that the law undermines the rationality of women by interfering in their individual life. Moreover, women's groups address and criticize the background attitude of the emergence of the protections of race and religion. Later, more than 100 civil society organizations endorsed a statement against anti-interfaith marriage law. Malbadar title these organizations as traitors. Here are civil society attempts. Civil society also attempt to address the importance of peaceful coexistence along with different religious groups, and peaceful coexistence and promotions of multiculturalism. They did also through interfaith and peace movement, organizing multicultural festival and concerts to persuade and raising the awareness among the public. But such kinds of activities are very much limited to urban areas like Rangoon and Mandalay. It's very difficult outside this city to counter the grassroots-based and in some way state-backed religious leaders' actions. Let's see. Along with this situation, at the same time, the critical 2015 elections approach, an amendment of the undemocratic constitution is being pushed by the opposition parties, activist groups, and the people through the signature campaign, a public rally across the nations. This campaign received around 5 million signatures. So this amendment proposal signatures had been submitted to the parliament. People movement for constitutional amendment demands for 3 points, even though 2008 constitution is a lot to amend. Some said that, we need to write a new constitution instead of asking for the amendments. But anyway, in that point, people approach is that 3 points I just wanted to point out that. First, to amend the amendment chapter. Then second, reduce the military seats. And third, to exclude the 59F, which is the qualification of the presidents and vice presidential candidates. So in that point, I just wanted to explain what the amendment section said. To amend the constitution, according to the 2008 constitutions, the parliament needs the approval of more than 75% of all the representatives of parliament. So that's why we need to reduce the parliamentary seats. At that point, the parliament is constituted by 25% of military seats, directly appointed by the commander-in-chief. Actually, in Burma, the president is not the commander-in-chief like United States. So what does that mean is the military has veto power for the amendment of the constitution. So for the presidential candidate, qualification for the presidential candidates, in chapter 59F, the candidate shall, he himself, we can see the words in constitution, he himself. The spouse, one of the legitimate children or other spouses, not owe allegiance to a foreign power, not be subject of a foreign power or citizen of foreign country. They shall not be persons entitled to enjoy the rights and privilege of a subject of a foreign country. It's what 59F means, definitely. So it's not prohibit the opposition leader, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, not only for her to be a presidential candidate, but also violates the rights of the people to choose their leader. Actually, it's very difficult to address all the issues emerged in transitional period. That's why it's important to address the underlying issue which are really critical and practical. In my point of view, here is a set of recommendations for short term, for this year. I support 6-party meeting that can truly insist on ground rules and clear timeline. And it should be the effective and real initiative for national reconciliation. Because why I suppose this 6-party dialogue, the parliament proposed six-party dialogues to discuss political crisis before 2015. Recently, few days, the president replying with uncertain message without mentioning any clear decision. But that is what we still need to push. Second, domestic and international pressure still need to continue against the anti-interfaith marriage law and counter the action of ultra-nationalist movement, because it's been manipulated in terms of popular supports and politics. And we still need to focus, at the same time, we still need to focus for the constitutional amendment till the last minutes of this year. Because these two issues really jeopardize the making, if we would like to make 2015, the making of democratic ground rules. Even if 2015 elections happen, the role of independence, if it has happened, the role of independent international and domestic observer is very important, monitoring the actions of Union Election Committee. Rules and regulation for the elections and rules and regulation for the observer. Some organizations already started for voter education for that, preparing. But I just wanted to, make sure that. Maybe the fourth one, can you see? Targeted sanctions. For those individuals who against democratic transitions and jeopardize this democratic transition. I know that it's controversial, but I do recommend that, targeted sanctions. You mean targeted sanctions? I do recommend that because the regime really pay attention to sanctions. So it's for short term, we were not afraid of that, not forever, short term. So for the government and all the key stakeholders, 2015 offers opportunities to make history. If all the key stakeholders demonstrate political will, and if they really want to make change, 2015 will make history. As I mentioned, the current political setting was designed under the military regime. For the future, actually this stages was the last stages of seven-step roadmap. They enjoying, and now we are, settling and enjoying the disciplined democracy. So for the future, to be a healthy democratic nation, to make sure this transition is leading to be a democratic nation, we definitely need our own new roadmap from now on. In order to develop this roadmap, I highly recommend that Democrats outside the formal state institutions, such as civil society, activist groups, and political parties, should strategize our own new roadmap. Maybe it's for 5 years or 10 years. On the other hand, for state institutions, we need to mentor and strengthen and help the democratic nature of state institutions, administrations, legislature, especially I would like to emphasize on judiciary. Legal reform is really needed. 3, it's high time to initiate unified ideological movement in line with democratic norms and human rights principles to counter potential threats of the so-called ultra-nationalism. Because only based on the certain ethnicity, certain race or religions, more inclusive national identity for all those our ethnic people. So we need to be aware of that. Burma is a multi-ethnic state. So for me, I wanted to recommend the third point. To initiate and unify ideological movement, I just wanted to go through the educational platform. So firstly, we need to reform the education system, state education system first. It's very difficult. I know that it's very difficult to initiate and deal with state institutions. But the second one said formal educations like our school, Yangon School of Political Science, and some other civil society through institution. Supporting the emergence of knowledge-based and right-based civic education institution will definitely play a key role in nurturing and well-informed citizens and new democratic leadership for the future. So that is what I would like to recommend. I don't see yet the state-owned education will provide the reform for democratic education. Actually, even after 2015 makes history, sustainability and development of new democratic leadership is quite essential. For me, whether 2015 makes or breaks, development of democratic leadership is critically important because under the long-term dictatorship, the vast majority of our young generations has lost their potential. And dictatorship has destroyed the idea of unifying the nation. So for us, for the citizen of current generations, in order to make history, we need to know first now where we are. And then we need to know where our country and society is leading under current political liberalization. Be aware of that. The second stage of 7-step roadmap already stated. After the successful holding of national convention, step-by-step implementation of the process that necessary for the emergence of genuine, disciplined, democratic system. Disciplined, democratic system. So we are leading to the disciplined democratic system. So in this regard, in 2008 constitutions, the basic principle of our formations of union mentioned that disciplined democratic system that enabling the defense services to be able to participate in the national political leadership role of the states. That is their principle. So that's why, of course, we do have the space to operate and to engage our activities. So taking this opportunity of liberalization states, we need to have our own new vision for our new democratic solution of multi-ethnic states. You know, if you don't know where you are going, so any road are leading, maybe we can see ultra-nationalist states or new types of authoritarianism. So that's why we do need to have our own visions and missions for new democratic Burma. So and then I do believe that even if we have only a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, we can change and make the history. We are not small, I believe that. We are not just a small group. So in this regard, most of the problem in our country, Burma, are because of lack of political will and commitment for the democratic country. So I just wanted to emphasize again that I do believe that if we have only a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, we can change and make the history. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will be very happy for your further questions. Thank you.
Zin Mar Aung, thank you for that charismatic speech, which you delivered beautifully. I will now turn the floor over to John Knaus for his comments. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Sally. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this opportunity. And I also wanted to thank Zin Mar Aung for asking me to respond to her presentation. But more importantly, I really want to thank Zin Mar Aung for speaking out about these issues. Here in Washington, it's fine to speak out about them, but particularly to speak out about them in Burma takes a tremendous amount of courage, and she should really be celebrated for that. So I really do. Zin Mar Aung laid out a fascinating outline, for lack of a better way, from roadmap to roadmap. And I think there were 4 themes that emerged for me during the presentation. 2 of those themes are quite negative, and then 2 of those themes are more positive. And I would like to I'll start with a negative and hopefully end on a positive note. But the first theme that I have noticed during the Burmese transition has been that women have become the victim of the transition. As Zin Mar Aung mentioned, it was the alleged rape of an Arakan woman that ignited the violence in 2012. And it was the false allegation of a rape of a Buddhist woman by 2 Muslims in Mandalay that was used as a rallying cry for the July episode of violence there. This has coincided and has been used as an excuse for the development of the interfaith marriage law to protect Burmese women, as well as 3 other laws that Zin Mar Aung mentioned that seem to be targeted directly at an invisible Muslim enemy. Perhaps what is so ironic and insidious is that the government forces that are supposedly aiming to uphold the virtue of Burmese women continue to tolerate and presumably direct the Burma army that uses rape as a weapon of war against ethnic women. For example, just this past weekend, it was reported that 2 Kachin teachers were raped and killed by Burmese army forces who were involved in fighting in the region. I think a second theme that emerged, sadly, is the split between the Burmese monastic community, or Sangha, and civil society. From independence to 1988, to particularly the Saffron Revolution of 2007, Burmese monks have been involved in most of the political events in Burmese history. However, the events of the last 2 years have put the Sangha and civil society and some of the political parties on the opposite sides for the first time. A prime example of this came on February 24th of last year with a statement by the 969 founder regarding Article 59F of the Constitution, which would forbid Aung San Suu Kyi from being president. He stated, "Everyone in the country, including me, wants Aung San Suu Kyi to be president, but I'm worried about those who are not ethnic people, such as Chinese and Muslim, will become president if Article 59F is amended." In essence, he was telling his vast legion of supporters that his movement's hysteria over foreign influences was more important than allowing one of the country's great leaders to run for the most important office in the country. A more recent example of this division occurred this past week when Wirathu gave a speech following the visit of the UN Special Rapporteur on Burma, Yang Hee Lee, a visit which was welcomed by many in civil society. The monk used language that seems shocking from a Buddhist monk. And I'm going to quote the language just so you can see sort of the level that this dialogue has gotten to. And I quote, "We have already made public our race protection law, but without studying it, this bitch keeps complaining about how it is against human rights. Can this whore really be from a respectable family? Don't assume you're a respectable person just because you have a position in the UN. In our country, you are just a whore. You may offer your ass to the Kalars, but you will never sell off our Rakhine state." This is talking about a UN official. One point should be mentioned, however, that there are still many monks in the Sangha who are trying to follow Buddhist practices and trying to counter the elements of Mabata. But they are unfortunately less organized, have less access to money, and many times more junior than the outspoken monks in Mabata and other organizations. In addition, there seems to be a silent majority within the Sangha that is uncomfortable with Mabata and other developments, but doesn't seem to know how to confront the most extreme elements within the Sangha. Finally, as Burmese political analyst Min Zin pointed out in the New York Times opinion piece a couple of months ago, the unprecedented chasm between the monkhood and the people is for now a source of tension and turmoil, but it augurs well for the country's political and social development in the long term. The advent of a counter-movement to Buddhist extremism suggests that the people of Myanmar are emancipating from traditional elites and taking a major stride towards modernity and democracy. So that's a hopeful note. One of the positive trends that I think really emerges from Zin Mar Aung's presentation is that women and women's organizations can be an example for the rest of civil society in the country. The women's organizations' reactions to Mawatha and the interfaith marriage law could potentially serve as a model for how civil society as a whole could organize in the responses to the Burma's transition. Ironically, by trying to protect women through repressing their rights, the push for the interfaith marriage law has in essence made the women's movement a much more powerful political force. Not only did 97 women's organizations release the statement that Zin Mar Aung mentioned, but they also attempted to link up and strengthen the previously ad hoc movements that had existed among them in an attempt to formalize and institutionalize the women's movement to ensure that it had as big and as lasting impact as possible. The women's movements have also encouraged initiatives that bring together disparate elements of the women's movement from throughout the country to work together on cross-cutting issues of common concern. And finally, women such as Zin Mar Aung, Ma Kinlay, and Kong Ja have become not only leaders of the women's movement, but of civil society as a whole. The last point I'd like to mention is that civil society and others should use the 2015 elections as an opportunity to mobilize civil society and the citizens of Burma to consolidate the democratic gains that have been made during the initial phases of Burma's transition and push for further reforms. The 2015 elections are not the end of the road for Burma's journey to becoming a full democratic state, but are in fact, if conducted in a free and fair environment, only one further step in Burma's transition or the beginning of Zin Mar Aung's new roadmap. The elections do, however, represent an excellent opportunity for civil society organizations to conduct activities focused on particular events and to promote awareness about a wide variety of political issues at a time when the Burmese population is focused on and interested in the politics of the country. Projects focused on electoral and party reform, voter education, and domestic election monitoring will provide opportunities for civil society organizations and Burmese citizens to strengthen existing electoral structures while also exposing any shortcomings in electoral policies and procedures. In addition, programs working on political party and candidate leadership development will help to ensure that the democratic gains that have been made over the past few years are further cemented within Burmese political culture. In conclusion, as Zin Mar Aung has pointed out, the 2015 elections could represent a make or break moment for Burma, but without constitutional changes, the 2015 elections also represent a remarkable paradox. For the government, a victory by the USDP in 2015 could mean a consolidation of power and a reaffirmation of the seven-step roadmap to democracy. For the opposition, a victory by the NLD and its allies, similar to the 1990 elections and the 2012 by-elections, could demonstrate the true will of the people for the first time, but without an overturning of the political order. In essence, power without legitimacy for the regime, or legitimacy without power for the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We now have some time for comments, questions. If you could raise your hand, identify yourself. We can take some questions from the floor. I see a hand at the back of the room.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Delancey from the State Department. John, you mentioned that there is perhaps, or hopefully, a silent majority in the monastic community that doesn't support Mawatha, but doesn't have the wherewithal to do anything about it. Given that the Mawatha's point about foreign influence is so insidious, what can foreign, and I want to ask both of you this, what can foreign governments and civil society organizations do to support maybe that silent majority in getting to a place where they can challenge some of Mawatha's supposedly religiously based statements to their communities?
You want to? Why don't you start?
Okay. Yeah. I think the easiest and the best answer, honestly, is nothing. I think that, as you say, the foreign influence sort of being tainted with the foreign influence might harm them more so than giving them some sort of support. I think that it really has to be a domestic, organic process that has to occur. If it is found out they're being supported by foreigners or the American government or the embassy or anything like that, it will only lead to more trouble for them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, John, I think out of the international community, they still would like to work with United States. Recently, at the same time, the State Department officials also pointed out for the Rohingyas and anti-interfaith marriage law, but they didn't make any comments or mentions, respond for that, but just for UN rapporteur only. So what does that show is that in some extent, they take care of the relationship between the United States and the government rather than others, international organizations, even rather than the United Nations, I think.
So I had a couple of quick thoughts, though. Inviting the progressive monks, if you can find them, to events at the embassy is great. Inviting, getting them on visitors programs so that they can go out and see what the rest of the world is like is fantastic. But supporting them directly is what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. I think that's where it's problematic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other question? Yes, Priscilla in the front, and then Arthur. Why don't we start with Priscilla?
Thank you. I'm Priscilla Clapp. I'm retired from the State Department Foreign Service. And I lived in Rangoon for a few years. Unfortunately, Zin Mar Aung was not around at that time.
Yes, I was in the prison.
You were in prison. I was working on that. But it didn't bear fruit until many years later. I want to say just a couple of things. Your presentation was fantastic.
Thank you.
And that's one reason that I have great hope for Burma, and that this transition is really going to lead somewhere positive, because you represent a growing voice in the country. It's much stronger now than it was 10 years ago. I think that one of the positive aspects of the reform has been to release civil society and the democracy movement in the country. I see it as being much more sophisticated and knowledgeable about governance itself and where they want the country to go, as represented by your presentation today. I agree basically with everything you said, and I think your recommendations are excellent. I also am very concerned about how the reforms so far, the way it's affected society, has opened up very negative features, as you've described with the monks and the conservative side of the society, and how it is turning on women. I think that it's not just the monks. I think it goes much deeper than that in a sort of male-dominated hierarchy, military. I think they're afraid of female leadership. They're afraid of Aung San Suu Kyi. They just have a fear of women being on the top. And you know what that means.
Yes.
And it's going to take a long time to deal with that, but you've got to do it. So I applaud you. One final thing. You mentioned doing something about judicial.
Yes.
I think that is very, very important. In looking at the Constitution, we tend to focus just on the provisions that give the military so many prerogatives. But I think one of the weakest parts of the Constitution is the judiciary. It is structurally a problem because the Attorney General and the Supreme Court are two different organizations. One is civilian, one is still dominated by military, and they're not effective. The courts are corrupt. If you had a good judiciary, you could start dealing with some of these social problems, and you wouldn't have to be out on the street protesting and leaving the whole job to civil society. You'd have courts to turn to, and I think that's really important to focus on. Yeah. My question for you is, how would you do it?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Yeah, it's a good questions. Yeah, of course. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, that's why I recommend in my recommendation slides to deal with international community. In this regards, we need the help of the international community in terms of, education. We still need to educate the legal officials. Then again, plus political will is still important. Without political will, whatever you do, for example, like EU trained for years for the police and human rights, but they still killing. That's a problem. I mean, yeah, my point of view is that we need to start within our own instance. For our sides, we need to do to take responsibility of ourselves. On the other hand, it's their responsibility. So political will, politically international pressure, and domestics that we need to push together. Thank you.
Thank you, Zin Mar Aung. Any other? Oh, Arthur, very good.
Thank you, my friend. It was absolutely fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I think we call Burma a transition, but I think I saw an article that is going to be coming in the next journal that maybe these governments are not in transition. They are who they are because they are not transitioning to anything really. But that's not really my question is on the role of education in planting the democratic idea in the current and next generation, looking at the maybe long term of democracy in Burma. Maybe 200 years ago, they used to rely on fiction, books like 1984, Animal Farm, to plant that democratic idea. But now, would you be able to explain maybe what sort of curriculum or what sort of material you could use in planning the democratic idea? Because if we import books like maybe by Larry Diamond, maybe to a country like Burma or Zimbabwe, definitely the ultra-nationalists wouldn't even be allowed into the country. So what sort of literature or books would you use in order to do that? Thank you.
And Zin Mar Aung, this might be an opportunity to mention a little bit about your own curriculum that you've been developing
Exactly.
here.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, thank you, your questions. Of course, last few years ago, around 2008 or 9, it's very difficult to talk about the word democracy. When we talk about democracy, we can see a magazine, journals, just only talk about others' country, not Burma. Translating into, English articles to Burmese, but not about Burma. It's about others' country. One would like to talk about democracy. So now it's, in this regard, I just wanted to appreciate the role of the library supported by the American Center and British Council. Since 1997, 1999, there was a library support by the United States Embassy, United States Information Service, but very few people can access. But anyway, we went there for reading and learning about democracy, like United States. We learned about the civil resistance and movement about Martin Luther King, something like that. We have such kinds of experience. That's why just a little knowledge can help us, make me inspire a lot. So now we, along with these liberalizations, there are so many articles and publications on democracy. Even for me, now I am now here for curriculum development for women political empowerment. So I learned about democracy and principle of democracy not from our Burmese language writings, from English writings, from British Council or American Center like that. So now we are translating this into Burmese language and develop curriculum for our Burmese fellows. Yeah, you are right, because we just simply engage emotionally. We don't like dictatorship. We don't like any kinds of authoritarianism operations just demonstrates and against military. That's not enough for a long time. So that's why we realize the critical role, the important role of the education, especially political education. You're right. Now Larry Diamond, Journal of Democracy, very popular in Burma, actually, initiated by Ours Group. We translate these articles in certain magazines, and so just recently, I think one of the Burmese journal mentions Mark photos. Yeah. So opening, we take these opportunities. What we need to do is that we need to make broader and broader this space.
I just want to make one point, though. Civil society can only do so much. It is the responsibility of the Burmese government to educate their people, too. And up until the last couple of years, the government was only spending 3% of its budget on education and health. Yeah. And so it really has to take a mind shift of the Burmese government as well to begin to educate their people again. And they've been closing all the universities for how long now?
I don't know. Since 1996.
So there needs to be a shift in the Burmese government. It can't fall on Zin Mar Aung to educate the Burmese population.
Ms. Walker and then this gentleman. Okay, we now have 4 hands.
So thank you very much for the presentation, Zin Mar Aung.
Thanks.
Towards the outset of the presentation, you mentioned how rapidly foreign direct investment had found its way into the country and how the business side of things became more dynamic quickly. And you also, I think, expressed some apprehension about that in some of the political dimensions were being calibrated and controlled in ways by the dominant power holders. With the benefit of hindsight now and seeing how the kind of business side opened very quickly, what do you think could have been done a bit differently, and what lessons might we learn from this, say, for the approach that's being taken to Cuba now, where there's a hope that the business opening will necessarily shape political pluralism and political reform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually the foreign direct investments and business are more than ready to invest in Burma, actually, before we are opening, especially in, gas pipelines, and not that much on the, technical or investments, higher level. I think we still don't have the foreign direct investment law. But for the parliament's already proposed and finishing law. But the problem is that there's still not proper rules and regulations for that in some instance. Because I think majority of the investments and business is still owned by the military and military-related people. So that's why they somehow delay to make, rules and regulations for the investments. Of course, on the other hand, in order to make investments better and dynamic, we need financial institution reform. In the past, the banking system, we can call actually banking system, just transferring money, not full functioning as a bank. So we still need, it's linking, I think, the reform of the banking system and financial institutions and law makings, and of course, rule of law is important. If not, if it's such kinds of factors doesn't go together, it can be success, I think.
This gentleman here.
Hi, Michael Martin from Congressional Research Service. Interesting, informative presentation.
Thank you.
Early on, you mentioned the military, but somewhat in passing. You, as far as I can recall, never mentioned any of the ethnic organizations, particularly those with armed militias, the larger political stage, if you will, of what is transpiring in your country. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the military and what's going on with them as an institution, particularly in the United States, in the context where the United States is enhancing engagement with the military, whether that's a positive or negative development in your assessment. So, with the nationwide ceasefire talks that are going on, but the continuation of the low-grade sort of civil war in your country, how does your roadmap map into this larger political context of national reconciliation and the formation of a country that accepts the ethnic communities on the border states as part of a federal Burma?
Thank you. It's a big question. Where can I start? The military relations. It's be aware of that to deal with such a notorious military in Burma. Because we know very well about how military governments and authority behave. Like that very, I'm sorry to talk about, very tricky. The only thing is that when we look back to the mood of transition, we can see very clearly the attitude of the transition is that to maintain the power as much as they can and getting legitimacy. So in this regard, it might be very difficult to deal with the military. But at the same time, we still need to try. I don't mean United States military to military relation. I don't mean like that. I mean if we encourage a stronger enough civil society that can counter military institution. That is what I mean. To touch with military to military relation is really, it's very dangerous, I think. So on the other hand, in terms of my roadmap, I just wanted to, many of the politics and ethnic groups and human rights and civil society are just, in my point of view, many activists are talking about based on their ground, not represent, not include all the Burmese people as a whole, just only based on their own ethnics, their certain organization like that. So we need to persuade them. We still going on, we have a few ethnic friends are talking about through our generations of what we need to do. For example, like as a Kachin people, we don't just only talk about for Kachin people. That's not enough. What about as a whole federal union, beyond the Kachin people, for Burmese? Like we still need to, not just about Burma. What about all the ethnic people? So we do need to have, that is what I mean for new roadmap. We need to consider about that, not just only on certain ethnics or certain religions or certain groups like that. Mm-hmm. We need to have master plan for that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that this is a very important part of what you're trying to do with your work. Yeah. I saw other hands. This gentleman here was next, and then this lady in the front.
From USAID, thanks very much for your presentation and your courage. I have if the panel can comment, you mentioned elections being very important for us to try to make sure happen are legitimate. But for instance, when it comes to voter registration, for instance, Rohingya, or even voter registration or even access in the areas that are controlled by ethnic armed groups, let's say in Kachin, if those things can't happen, if people can't register to vote, who ought to be able to, large numbers of them, or even vote, it'd be very hard for the elections to be considered legitimate, and the world is watching as this is like a bellwether of if Burma's really making progress. If you could comment on what you think about the chances for such things, good legitimate registration and voter turnout.
Yeah, it's also important. What we really need and what government need is that to make sure to have citizenship law. We don't have proper citizenship law, and so many government officials corrupted. For example, like our own ethnic people don't don't get identity for registration, but on the other hand, for example, like the Chinese people who don't even know in Burmese language, they already get just only pay for some money for the registration officer. So many people like that. So that what we need is urgently citizenship laws that are in line with 21st century situations. Then plus corruption. It's very difficult and deeply rooted issue. I know. So that's why it's still challenging. It's not very easy task, I think.
I think also you have to consider that the election itself is only for 75% of the parliament. It's not even for the whole parliament. There's already 25% of the seat. So to call it free and fair, even when you're starting on that basis point, is a little difficult. And you notice that the international community is now calling for inclusive and credible elections rather than free and fair elections, which seems to be a little bit of a hedge because there are some real definitions of free and fair, and inclusive and credible seems to be a little bit wishy-washy to me. And I think that they're preparing for a lot of the problems that you're talking about, and that they want to. Most people in the international community want these elections to be successful, and how you define that is going to have to be seen after the elections.
Hi, Mary Marston, American University. Thank you so much for speaking with us. And my question was relating to women's rights in the region. So how are you planning to engage young men, as well, probably young men would be easier to engage, with women in creating more equality for women within Myanmar society or Burmese society, through education, through YSPS, or through Rainfall? How do you put a roadmap for that?
Thank you. I know that you already visit Yangon School of Political Science. Yeah, of course. Based on my own experience and through these two organizations, very first class of the Yangon School of Political Science, we have the Introduction to Political Science. In the earlier classes, we don't have the feminisms or something like that, because teachings and learning and talking about feminism is really, very difficult in our society. But in the political science point of view, I try to approach that. So starting from the third batch of our class, I started to introduce Introduction to Feminisms, not just only for the women, but also for young men. So what I found and learned from this class is that before I present and explain about feminism, it's very negative perceptions on feminism when I ask them. But after learning that, they do realize that, feminism is not that, bad. It's it's acceptable and something like that. So that is what I'm doing through these two institutions. On the other hand, through with the Rainfall Gender Studies Group. Rainfall Gender Studies Group is just only for women political empowerment, because upcoming 2015 election is very close. So I just started last year women political empowerment training. We have already trained for around 150 to 200 around there. So, but in this regard, even women themselves, the perceptions on feminism and women empowerment is quite, different, not very positive. So that's why I, realize and notice that the importance of the educations and young generation is really important. After attending this class, after learning from us through discussions and debating, nurturing these skills, make them, much more, I think, democrats and easier to, accept different perceptions, and they realize that, we need to learn more about that. So, because we have been, living the closed society for a long time, and male dominance, like Priscilla said, military rule is very, I take this opportunity, I just wanted to point out that now, in our country, that was two most powerful institutions. One is military, the second is religious, leading by the monks. Now, these two institutions plays a lot. That is what we need to empower much more on women.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, question there.
Kelly.
Yeah.
Hi, Zin Mar Aung.
Thank you.
Kelly Curry from Project 2049. I'm just going to ask you a philosophical question, I guess. Over the past 4 years since you've been able to come out and work in civil society and be politically active and take the role that you have, I was hoping that you could just kind of reflect a little bit on what have been the best things that have happened and the most positive things that have happened for you in the past 4 years, and what have been some of the more negative lessons or negative things that have happened to you, in order to kind of help us maybe think about how we should be looking both at the past 4 years and looking ahead to what's coming down the road for Burma. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. I think for me, the remarkable thing is that we just, started taking this opportunity of liberalizations. Actually, when we started the Yangon School of Political Science, after the President Thein Sein took power, firstly, our name of the school is not fully Yangon School of Political Science. We just started with Yangon School. Then just testing the water. Yangon School for teaching English, by teaching English, something like that, we will put in a political idea or something like that. That is what we prepare for that. But testing the water, that is very fortunate for me, because along with the international engagement, then after the recognition by the international community, using the name of the Yangon School of Political Science, when I received the awards, then at the same time, as I said, they really take care of that, the relationship between the United States, whether they would like to, they would like to change really or not. They know very well about the role of the United States. So that's a good thing. But the thing is that our school is now moving here and there, the rules and regulations. For example, like when we hired the place for schools, when we engage the authority, they don't directly put a pressure for us. They know very well about it. We are not the person like to be pushed, but indirectly, the owner of the apartments or something like that, they're ordinary people, don't want to deal with the authority, don't want to be pushed, and don't want to live under the pressure. So that's why during these 4 years we have been moved for 4th place. that's a significant one. Yeah. But at the same time, the registration for the civil society organizations, the activities that the civil society try to engage is really, really remarkable thing. But the thing is that the rules and regulations still need to be done to make clear, to get legitimate rule for the civil society organizations. I think in the future, the role of the civil society organization is much more important than, I think, others' engagement to balance military dominance society.
Well, I think you have created many new organizations, and this has been part of your life over these years that is so, this blossoming of your work, and a series of organizations that you've created that has been truly remarkable.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything more about the work of Rainfall, particularly your attempts to reach out beyond the urban areas? How are you managing to do that, to try to get beyond the cities?
Yes, thank you, Sally. Yes, actually most of the civil society organizations based in Rangoon. But the problem is that when we organize the training, for the people who live outside the city, it's very difficult to come to the cities. That's why we create a program for outreach program. So we used to travel across the country to reach out, not just only for teaching, but also we can learn a lot from their, their daily life, they're on the ground. So on the other hand, we make a publication program, or we wanted to introduce the feminism through our society, not just, and also we have already introduced the International Women's Day to our people in Mandalay, actually very conservative city, let's say. So I just introduced last 2 years ago. So if they don't even know there's International Women's Day, we just celebrate the achievements of women like that. So that is, our people still need to be reach out to the international, community.
Thank you. Mark Plattner.
This is a really interesting presentation. Thank you. It just occurred to me, though, that here we've spent almost 90 minutes talking about the transition in Burma, and we hardly mentioned Aung San Suu Kyi at all, which is interesting in itself, but I'm just curious as to your view. Is she still playing so central a role? How do you see her role evolving as the transition moves ahead?
Yeah, for me, she is still playing central role. But the thing is that others, we do have space. In the past, nobody have space. She is spearheading the voice of the people. But, along with these liberalizations, she is playing leading role. Just think about that. Without her leadership, military very easily to handle others, still, critical and still powerful. But on the other hand, of course, we have space to operate. So that's why getting this opportunity, we are not directly doing with her, but we're still taking this opportunity to take our own roles and this space pushed together.
And of course, the efforts to repeal
59F
is central to your whole agenda, which would then allow her to run.
Yeah, that's why not just only her party members, people and other oppositions, activist groups join this movement, the Constitutional Amendment movement, not just only by the NLD, but also others, civil society and 88 generations and people, of course.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Carl Gershman.
Again, thanks, Zin Mar Aung. You didn't really spell out the midterm, long-term roadmap. Could you do that and also connect it to the short term? In other words, if the NLD is able to do well in the elections, they'll have more power, they can leverage that power. How do you see the 5 to 10 year roadmap that you talked about, playing out?
Yeah. I think for me, as I said, that we still need to have Democrats initiate new roadmap. So that's countering and demanding for firstly, I think constitutional amendment will be still priority for the roadmap. Or maybe we need to, collaborate with the ethnics, some ethnic groups, old constitutions, even I think NLD already have the constitution, but because of these liberalizations and negotiations, they say aside about these constitutions. I mean, my roadmap is that to nurture and to initiate and negotiate with the current stakeholders and power holders, because we have some forms of network among our generations, including the ethnic groups, and we do realize that without own missions. The first thing is I would like to introduce the ideological movement. I mean, in the past we don't have. This movement is very, very, very clear against military and we call for democracy. But now we can see, it's sad to say that I feel like that our society is lack of ideology. So that's why we need ideological movements. So my roadmap will include the initiating of this movement, ideological movement, and then through education. Then after that, if we can call other stakeholders, leading by the civil society and democratic groups and new leadership, I do believe that we can develop new roadmap. Not just only me, but also others. We still need to invite and collaborate with others, ethnics, and civil society group.
And I know that when you say ideological movement, you're really referring to democratic values,
Yes.
human rights,
Yeah.
and multi-ethnic
Yes.
identity, a civic multi-ethnic identity for Burma.
Yes.
A national,
vision. Yeah. Because even in our national identity, so it's based on, Burmese and religious. So that's why that is really important, not just based on the ethnics, not just based on the certain religious. So new visions, national visions for us. Then I would like to refer our independence declarations. Actually, our independence leaders already write about that. It's really in line with the democratic and human rights and liberties. The norms are really perfect. But nobody mentioned that the independence declarations. So we are, since last year, some new generation started to deliver and reintroduce independence declaration. So our new roadmap will be in line with the independence declaration. Actually, 2008 Constitution is not in line with our independence declaration.
Well, I think that is a great note to end on. So, Zin Mar Aung, I want to thank you for a very charismatic presentation today, and to say that you are a great ambassador for your country, and I think with the need for a new generation of leadership, see that you have an important role to play, and we wish you very well. So, thank you so much. Thank you, John.